Hey, I'm back. I have successfully moved to Juneau, Alaska from Soldotna, Alaska. I am back in Juneau again. This is going to be a little bit different topic than most of my videos have been in the past, as I am going to be looking at Jeffrey Smith, a anti-genetically modified organism advocate, especially as it relates to foods. I don't normally. This isn't a group that I've pretty much had much of an interest in going after until it started hitting close to home, as in I'm not going to go into much detail, but let's say a person close to me, relative, has become pretty sold on all of this in terms of distributing and showing books, videos, and such, and cutting out all of these genetically modified foods from their diet. And then asking me to do a survey of literature for them, and in surveying the literature, I found a bunch of contrary information to what these books, videos, and such are saying. So it kind of made it a little personal. Now, I want to make it really clear. I'm going to preface this a little bit. Hopefully, this will make some sense. In that, I am not advocating genetically modified foods here. Okay, I'm not saying I'm all for eating genetically modified foods, nor am I saying I'm against eating all genetically modified foods. What I am against, and this goes back to all of my other videos that I've made, all my other debunked style videos that I've made, is that I am against people who lie to present their point. Okay, genetically modified foods could be dangerous and toxic as hell. Okay, that could be the reality out there. However, Jeffrey Smith does not present any evidence for that. Instead, he presents misinterpretations, outright lies, fear techniques, and agenda-driven propaganda to support his case. Now, there is a great video series on Jeffrey Smith done by EvoGen Videos. It's fantastic. I highly recommend you watch it. And if you're not subscribed, stop watching my dumbass and go subscribe to him. Excellent series. I will put a link down below to his videos on the series. And I'm going to try not to overlap too much with what he said, although there's certainly going to be some overlap. He's been exceptional in researching out the flaws in Jeffrey Smith and other anti-GM people's arguments. However, so this is it. So people who lie to support their case piss me off, and I don't care even if I 100% agree with it. I mean, if there's a group out there who wants to eliminate, I don't know, the teaching of intelligent design from all school curricula, or a particular school curricula, and something I support and hold dear to me, and I find out that they're lying and making up statistics and using flawed science to support that, I'm gonna be angry about that. And so it doesn't matter if their conclusions I agree with. What matters to me is the fact that I hold the peer review process, I hold science, I hold the truth with a capital T to be of utmost importance, education to be of utmost importance. And I get a little bit suspicious when I know nothing else about an issue except for the fact that I know that the advocate of that issue consistently misrepresents, lies about the evidence for it. It makes me a little suspicious that there may not be anything behind it, because I think if there was, I think they would kind of be jumping on the real facts instead of making up shit as they go along, which is what I'm going to show here Jeffrey Smith is doing. Now, this is an interview that Smith did. I will put a link down below to the original video so you can watch it yourself. I'm not going to show everything that he talks about. I will show just the bits of it that I had access to, the original papers, the papers that he cites, as well as his Huffington Post blogs. So anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop rambling on here and get started.
Gary Franchi here for a special edition of the Reality Report. We now have an interview with Jeffrey Smith, who is the author of Genetic Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically engineered food. He's an international best-selling author, and he's really on the front lines of the GMO issue. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And I might add, while a very passionate and very good, forceful public speaker, Doesn't appear to hold any degrees in any of the sciences, nor seem to understand the science that he speaks about.
You and Clyde Cleveland, we interviewed Clyde just earlier today. You guys have both issued a joint statement on the importance of the GMO issue. Talk to us about it. Give us a synopsis. What is it? What is GMO foods?
Genetically modified foods are those where the genes of one species, typically bacteria or viruses, are forced into the DNA of another species.
Just curious, Jeff, why do you use the term GMO instead of the proper term for what you just described, which is transgenic? GMO is just genetically modified, meaning that it differs in a significant way from its parent, while transgenic refers to lateral transfer of genes or groups of genes from one group of one species to another, which is exactly what when you're talking about these GM crops, you're talking about transgenics. And in fact, the papers that you often cite or refer to, if you don't directly cite them, they're using the term transgenics. They don't use GMO. You consistently use it. It seems to me, I mean, transgenics kind of sounds scarier. If your goal is to scare people, which it appears to be, GMO has kind of a friendly sound to it. Genetically modified organism, as opposed to transgenic, which, you know, has that Frankenstein appeal that you are so fond of bringing up. So I'm just kind of curious as to why you do that.
Now, another food that's going to be hitting the shelves very soon is the salmon. In Massachusetts, the FDA is actually considering introducing this into the food supply. The salmon grows at a faster rate so it can hit the market sooner. Why is this a threat to the food supply?
Just a quick interjection here. I also am somewhat opposed to the introduction of these genetically modified salmon, transgenic salmon, into the wild population, only because of the fact that I know how sensitive wild populations can be, especially of salmon, and Atlantic salmon is listed as a threatened species. Wild Atlantic salmon are, at least. And I believe in erring on the side of caution for this. So there's a little bit of agreement with that. The human health concerns, however, well, we'll get to those.
Well, it's a threat to the food supply, both for food safety and also the environment. The salmon itself may contain higher levels of allergens. In fact, there was a higher allergic reaction rate tested by the company.
All right, now the fun really begins. What Jeff is referring to here is a summary report published by the FDA, which summarizes all of the studies done by the AquAdvantage company as well as other laboratories on the safety for human consumption, as well as a number of other comparisons of this genetically modified, this transgenic salmon compared to the wild stock Atlantic salmon. Where they look at the fat content, lipid content. They basically analyze every single possible aspect of this and compare it to determine human safety. Okay, I will put a link down below to the whole report if you feel like reading it. It's awfully long and a little bit dry. However, this allergen thing made me laugh because I went all the way through trying to find it. And there's a whole section on allergens in this report, and I was looking for where, because in other things, he doesn't say it here, but specifically in another article Jeff wrote, he talks about 40% more allergens in the genetically modified salmon than when compared to the normal fish. Now, that sounds pretty harsh, right? 40% more allergens. Well, that's incredible, right? But I'm going to kind of break down, hopefully this will make some sense, exactly what the report says and exactly what that means. First of all, this 40%, in looking at that, it's not written, doesn't say that in the report anywhere. What it has a table of measured amounts of these various allergenic compounds, and the highest one recorded, meaning the max. You know, when they have you have a distribution, min, max, mean, standard deviation. The maximum, the one fish with the maximum had 40% more of these allergens. The minimum actually had less than the average for the Atlantic salmon, wild type Atlantic salmon. However, the mean was statistically significantly more. I think it was about 1.5 nanograms per gram of fish. So it had more, okay, more allergens. So that, say, okay, that's significant. Significantly more allergens. Let's ignore his 40% and all that crap. But what does that mean? Does that mean that 40% more people or 2% more people that were never allergic to salmon are now going to be allergic to salmon? Is that what that means? Does it mean it has new and different types of allergens that, for all we know, everybody's allergic to? Is that what it means? No, it's not what it means. What this means is that the compounds in salmon that make salmon allergenic to some people, right? Some people, there's a certain percentage of people who can't eat salmon because they're allergic to it. They can't eat fish, just like people can't eat peanuts, can't eat whatever. People who are allergic to salmon, the modified salmon have a statistically significant more of the compound they're allergic to than the wild type salmon. So what this means, the grand big meaning of this is that people who are allergic to salmon can't eat the new salmon either, right? They're going to be allergic to the new salmon the same way they're allergic to the old salmon. I'm trying to think of one of my stupid analogies for this. This would be like saying, you know what, Planters Peanuts has a 16-ounce can, and they just came out with a 22-ounce can, and I want to fight against this because you know that 22-ounce can is 40% more allergen than the 16-ounce can does? You see what I'm saying here? People are already allergic to salmon. They can't eat salmon, and they can't eat the new salmon. So this claim is complete bullshit in the report that he's talking about.
It might contain higher levels of cancer-promoting hormone called IGF-1.
So the key to any good food scare is to use the term potentially cancer-causing in front of everything that you discuss. Jeff, I just want to say thumbs up, you're a master at that. But let's talk about this IGF-1 and its abundance in the tissue of these transgenic salmon and what that actually means. Now, first of all, there's no studies whatsoever linking consumption of IGF to increased cancers. There is a link, there is a paper that I found. If I can find it again, I will put a link down below. I don't know that I can or not. That does show that individuals who produce, like your body produces this hormone, individual humans who produce larger amounts of this are more prone to colorectal, breast cancer, prostate cancer, testicular cancer than are the general population. So, hey, increased levels of this in your body can cause it. But let's ignore that and let's just say, okay, you can get it from diet, which I don't know that it's possible, but say you can get it from your diet, you can ingest this and it will raise your levels. Now, what does that mean? So, therefore, these salmon have higher levels of it, right? They must be cancer-causing. But let's now in the report that you're drawing your information from this and other sources here, or this and other things from you, they talk about the levels of it. The mean amount of this IGF-1 in these transgenic salmon is 9.2 nanograms per gram of tissue, compared to 8.8 nanograms per gram of tissue in wild type Atlantic salmon. That's 0.4 nanograms per gram more. Wow, that's incredible, isn't that's amazing. Think about that. 0.4 nanograms per gram. I'm sorry, I'm being a little snarky. But how does that compare? That's pretty interesting. So where does this increased IGF-1 come from in these transgenic salmon? Why, it comes from Chinook, also known as king salmon. They got the gene from those fish. So just out of curiosity, the authors also have a table comparing these IGF levels in these transgenic salmon to other foods and other things that we eat. And it turns out that the king salmon have approximately 2 to 3 times as much, okay? Up to 35 nanograms per gram of body tissue of this IGF in their tissue. I don't see you campaigning against eating wild king salmon. Chum salmon have twice the amount. So do cutthroat trout. Not cutthroat trout, rainbow trout. Organic rainbow trout have twice this level of this hormone in their tissue than does these transgenic salmon. So these transgenic salmon have slightly more than wild Atlantic salmon, but significantly less than wild Pacific salmon do. All of the wild Pacific salmon that were tested. Let's compare that to beef. What does organically grown, hormone-free beef have? Oh, gee, 50 nanograms per gram of tissue. Okay, 50. That is roughly 5 times more than these genetically modified salmon you're trying to scare people about. So are you rallying against people eating organic beef? I don't see that either. You're taking the stuff out of perspective. You're feeding it to a scientifically illiterate audience, which is remarkably like other douchebags that I have made videos to. You know who you are. Because you know that your audience isn't going to look it up. They're just going to be like, oh my God, those salmon, oh, they're going to release them into the wild, and oh God, we're all going to die of cancer when we eat them. Okay? Fuck you.
More antibiotics.
More antibiotics, Jeff? That's pretty interesting, considering the report by AquAdvantage discusses specifically the fact that because the freshwater phase of these genetically modified transgenic salmon is reduced, the need for antibiotics is actually less than in all other farmed salmon stocks. So I'm a little unclear as to where you get this increased antibiotic claim from.
Now, to give you a background, the FDA is actually designed to promote the biotechnology industry. That's one of their mandates, and it has been for about 20 years. That's why, for example, they don't require any testing on genetically modified crops, and why they create such a loose and ridiculous approval process for the genetically modified salmon.
You know, I don't know how in the hell you can look yourself in the mirror. Probably easy when you're making shit tons of money off of your lies. Let's think about this. So you're going to honestly say that that genetically modified crops have no process of approval? The FDA just rubber stamps them and lets them go right into the supermarket with zero testing? First of all, that's completely and total bullshit. Absolute total bullshit. Okay, there's an extensive amount of testing, and if you look at these tests, they're out there. Because here's the other side of that coin, which you probably didn't, well, maybe you thought of, but you know that your fucking audience isn't going to think of, is the idea that if the FDA immediately gives a green light to any product these biotech companies produce, no matter how dangerous, no matter what it claims to be or do, they just immediately say, oh, put it on the shelf, right? No questions asked. That means that the millions of dollars that these biotech companies are spending in independent testing laboratories and such to get these products tested is only because they care, right? There's no other reason, because the government's not making them test it. They must be just only be doing it because, well, they just love humanity so much and they could care less about profits. That's kind of the other side of that, don't you think? No, but the reality is there's rigorous testing. You can go to the FDA website and you can look at all of the testing requirements before they're even allowed to submit a product. Okay? That's this whole thing. Okay, that's where you guys are like, and only the industry has to do the tests, so they just take their word on it. No, that's for the application. The application before the application for a new transgenic for human consumption can be put on the agenda of the FDA, the company has to have paid for a certain amount of testing. Certain bases had to have been covered before the FDA will even look at it. All right? This is what it comes down to with you creationists. Fucking, it's this whole idea that if anything disagrees with you, it's because it's part of the grand conspiracy. Isn't that right? You know, you've drank the Kool-Aid or whatever the fuck you guys want to say about it. This pisses me off. So here's an example, just kind of made up example. Let's just say that here's a biotech company and they produce a genetically engineered rutabaga, right? It's genetically modified rutabaga. Now you know, boy, that anybody that eats this rutabaga is gonna die of ass cancer like within 2 days, right? That's what you're gonna put on your website. That's what you're promoting all over the place. However, after 6-month review process, the FDA approves this rutabaga for human consumption. Now, the only reason the FDA would approve such a dangerous thing is because they're paid off to do so, because they've been created to accommodate this biotech, right? There's no other reason behind it. It couldn't be that the actual product's safe and your claims are full of shit, right? That's not even on the table as a consideration, right? It has to be that it's corrupt. That's exactly the same thing that these fucking conspiracy theorists are saying. These people looking for lizard men, all of the same shit. They use the same argument. Why isn't NASA looking for lizard men? Well, because NASA's in the pocket of the lizard men, or whatever it is. Don't know if that's even an accurate statement. But the point is that it's a circular reasoning, and it's found throughout, not just your books and your shit, but throughout other ones. This whole The World According to Monsanto, repeatedly talking about, and then they approved this product, which is known to be dangerous. The problem with that is the known to be dangerous part. You're using the fact that it's known to be dangerous according to you and your friends as evidence that therefore the FDA is corrupt in its approval process. So again, Jeff, fuck you.
They rigged their approval committee. They had very, very low bar in terms of passing for safety, and still their approval committee said that the data was so terrible, it was so sloppy, that they sent the company back. Even though they'd been submitting data for 10 years, they sent them back and said, do more studies because this is inadequate to protect the health of the public or the fish environment.
Do you hear yourself? Do you? So, in other words, this over 10-year-long process that AquAdvantage went through to get approval, or attempting to get approval, they still haven't yet, from the FDA, why, that's just an anomaly, right? Otherwise, the FDA just green lights everything these guys produce. But in this case, boy, it took over 10 years, and that's only because this salmon is so dangerous and so whatever, okay? You're doing the equivalent thing of creationists going, even an evolutionist admitted, okay? You've already established that the FDA is corrupt and on the side of the industry, and it created, in fact, specifically for the industry. So once that's established, the fact that it's taken over 10 years for this one patent to be approved, or this one product to be approved, only shows how bad the product is, right? Couldn't possibly be that, just maybe their approval process is a lot more stringent than you're giving credit for, than you're claiming. Maybe you're lying about it. Ever consider that possibility? I have. Again, the 180-page report, 180 fucking pages by the FDA, detailing out all of the safety concerns and the standards of testing that AquAdvantage has to go through, what they've completed and what they still need to do in order to get approval. I don't think this is an anomaly. I don't think that this is some the only thing that the FDA caught them on, or caught industry on, or made them go through more rigorous testing. All of the literature I've seen seems to suggest otherwise, that this standard is pretty well typical, and in fact I'm going to include again testimony, 10-year-old testimony in fact, where this is for a Senate committee where the director of the FDA, I think it was the director, is detailing out detailing the process by which any transgenic product intended for human consumption has to go through before approval. So again, Jeff, you're full of shit.
It sounds like what the FDA did when they introduced aspartame into the food supply, sloppy research, and just push it in. Artificial sweeteners, we know how bad they are.
All right, this is for Gary Franchi, our host here. The aspartame thing that you seem to be so convinced of, it's a fucking internet hoax. Go to Snopes, go anywhere and look up. Wikipedia has a great article on it. It's a hoax. All right? That being said, Gary, I wanted to let you know I'm the finance minister of the state of Alaska, and I've got over $17 million in the state that I need to get out before it's seized by rebels. And I was just saying, if you send me all of your banking information, your PIN numbers and all of that kind of stuff, and help me deposit this $17 million into your account, I'll give you a 10% finder's fee for helping me out with that. Okay? Anyway, we'll talk.
So we have no recourse when we go shopping. We have no ability to know. Or do you have any pointers that you could share with our viewers on how they can determine?
Yes, actually I do. There are certain products that are actually voluntarily labeled as non-GMO, and we actually compile those that have been enrolled in a new third-party verified system for making non-GMO claims. So our shopping guide is available for everyone at nongmoshoppingguide.com. We also have it in an iPhone, a free iPhone application called Shop No GMO. We have a pocket guide. We have it in a variety of versions because most Americans say they would avoid eating GMOs, genetically modified organisms, if they were labeled.
Oh, see, now I see. Jeff, I'm afraid I owe you an apology. See, I was under the mistaken impression that you were trying to control the American food market. Tell us what we can and cannot eat. Take away our ability to choose. When instead, really all you want is labeling. You just want these transgenics to be labeled so that the American consumer can look at the grocery store, go to the store, look at a product and say, yes, I want to eat a transgenic food, or no, I don't want a transgenic food to be eaten by my family. See, I had you all wrong. You're all about choice.
We have a phenomenal opportunity over the next 14, 15 months to kick GMOs out of the food supply. Yes!
No, wait a second. Fuck you then. Now you see, I wouldn't have had a problem with that little clip there if you'd have said, we want to take all dangerous or demonstrated dangerous GMO products off the supermarket shelves, or we want more stringent investigation into the health risks, or any of these other things, or back to your labeling thing. See, I wouldn't have had a problem with that. Here you reveal yourself. You want them to, if it is by your definition a GM, a transgenic, you want it removed from the stores, regardless of its health risks, right? You could care less if it's demonstrated to be 100% safe. You want anything with that designation taken out of our food supply, don't you?
And that's why the FDA ignores 9 out of 10 Americans who want GMOs labeled in order to support the economic interests of the 5 biotech companies that make GMOs, because they knew if they were labeled, they wouldn't sell and they wouldn't be produced. So it's designed to hide from the public in order to promote economic interests of a few companies that make dangerous products, that rig their research, and we found also that they have threatened scientists, threatened media, kept the information about the adverse findings off of the public domain.
Shh, they can hear every word.
However, we've been able to expose it, and now there's actually overwhelming evidence of harm from genetically modified foods, so much so that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine issued a warning last year urging all doctors to prescribe non-GMO diets to all patients.
So the American Academy of Environmental Medicine supports you, Jeff. Well then, I mean, long live support from an organization that has in its membership homeopathic medicine practitioners, acupuncturists, aromatherapists, nutritive therapists, whatever the fuck that's supposed to be. Don't believe me? I'm going to put a link to their homepage down below. And there's a place where you can search for practitioners in your area by state. Type in your state if you're in the United States, or if you're not, or whatever, randomly pick a U.S. state, type it in, and then it'll give you a list of doctors with their specialties, and you'll see all of these really fun alternative doctors listed, as well as a few, legitimate practitioners.
Saying that the GM animal feeding studies have shown things like reproductive problems, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, and gastrointestinal problems.
Hear that claim a lot from you and your group. However, the odd thing, the thing that I have an issue with is you seem to have, absolutely not one shred of evidence to back it up. Not one citation supports your claim for all of these health problems. I keep thinking there must be something out there, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be saying it. But every single source you guys cite either completely directly contradicts the claims you make, which I'm going to show here in a bit, or doesn't exist, or is just from a newspaper article, an email you got. Tell me how that counts as scientific peer-reviewed evidence, douchebag.
In fact, last week I posted a blog on Huffington Post which showed that when rats were fed genetically modified soybeans, they had changes in the uterus and ovary and sexual cycle.
Now we're getting into precisely what pisses me off about Jeffrey Smith and these other anti-GMO crowd. And not just them. This is the same thing that's pissed me off in the past with the hereditarian race realist group and young earth creationists. It's exactly the same thing. This is where you take a scientific paper, and a good, well-researched, well-done scientific paper, and you pick one tiny little detail on it that, if you leave off the second half of the sentence, sounds like it supports your cause. And then you take that little detail, extrapolate it out, say, and then claim that the authors are now claiming that this happens. You'll take when the authors say, whatever it happens to be. This is exactly like you guys recall back with the Lucy thing, when you get these creationists going, and then these scientists prove that Lucy was nothing but a knuckle-walking chimpanzee based on a statement that the finger bone was somewhat chimp-like. That kind of a thing. This is exactly what he's doing here. And to me, it proves that you have nothing. If that's what you have to stoop to, if that's the level you have to go to provide evidence for your cause, I'm going to take a shot in the dark and guess that there's actually no evidence supporting your claims at all. Now, this paper here is by Brazil et al. That he's referring to. I will put a link to his Huffington Post blog and to the paper, which is linked in his blog as well. I'll put where you can get a full access PDF of this file. You can read it yourself. The conclusions of the authors. Now, the authors fed rats I don't remember what the control was specifically. Then they fed them organic soy as an experimental treatment and this transgenic soy as an experimental treatment, right? So there were three treatments of rats. And then they compared a number of things, because there have been suggestions that soy can affect, because of the estradiols, because of something in there, pseudo-hormones contained in soy, that it can have effects on the female reproductive system. And the authors found that, yes, indeed, that's what they were studying. They were studying the effect of soy. Okay? Using the transgenic soy was just sort of a secondary, an addition to the experiment. And they found, guess what? They found that, yes, indeed, the soy treatments, transgenic and organic, okay, both soy treatments had nearly identical effects on the female reproductive system of these rats. There were a few slight differences in the lumen and epithelial cells of the uterus in the transgenic rats, which the authors conclude their conclusion has to do with slight differences in the lipid, sugar, and amino acid content of the transgenic soy versus the normal organic soy. Okay? Now, what's important to understand about this experiment is that this was sort of like a, what do you call it, what was that, the Super Size Me type experiment, right? The same kind of flaw that had in it, where these rats were fed only soy, no other additions to their diet. The experimenters were trying to see what soy alone caused. Soy alone. Now, obviously, no human being is eating just soy. However, they do speculate that soy-based products in large quantities might have some adverse and is therefore worthy of further study. They do not distinguish the effects of the transgenic versus organic. Okay, Smith is lying about this. He's only focusing on the effect the transgenic has, and some of the things, in fact, all of the things that he outlined in his little statement there and in his Huffington Post blog are also found in the organic soy. Do you see what I'm saying here? So he's deliberately, now this is not like maybe he's just scientifically illiterate and didn't understand it. You can't help it. If you read the paper, the authors repeatedly state the similarities were far greater between the soy organic and the soy transgenic groups than they were between that and the control, between both soy treatments and the control. Okay, that's what the authors are emphasizing. Again, I don't know if that's the best evidence he has. Then I'm going to suggest that he's full of shit.
This is just the latest in a series of studies which show as much as a 5-fold increase in infant mortality, smaller babies, sterile babies, inability to have babies by the 3rd generation, changes in the testicles, et cetera, et cetera. And these are going on even in government studies, and yet the data is ignored and denied by the biotech industry.
I find it really interesting that the list that Smith just gave on all of the health problems associated with GM crops, which you might interpret to be from, a multitude of different independently verified studies. He gives the same list over and over again. The list is repeated by not just him, but by others in the anti-GM movement. However, what's funny is every single one of those claims, every one of them, from infant mortality to changes in testicle structure to all of that, come from 2 studies. Two studies, both from Russia, independent studies, one by Irina Ermakov and one by Alexei Surov. Sorry. Neither study has been published. That's what's hilarious. Neither one. The Ermakov study was done in 2005 or 2006 and has yet to be accepted for peer review. Okay. I will put a link down below to a reference. It's unfortunately not available online, where the Ermakov study is heavily criticized, not by pro-GMO, not by industry. I'm sure that's the next thing that you guys are going to start spouting, that the same thing that the creatards do, that, the only reason that these studies aren't published is because, there's a conspiracy against us or something like that. I'm waiting for it. I haven't run across it yet. But the point is, there's a Marshall et al. 2007, where they actually interview Ermakov and ask her specifically about her methods. Because again, this is not published. All of this study, the information on this study is from her newspaper releases, her talking to the press, her speaking before anti-GMO groups. The same thing with the Surov paper, the Surov study again. I hate to keep doing quote, but you understand what I'm saying. All right. Now, if you may understand, a study in science doesn't mean shit unless it's peer reviewed. Otherwise, it's just an anecdote because you cannot reproduce the results. You can't, in any way. You cannot perform these kinds of studies. So in the Ermakov, she details out her experimental methods, and then a number of other people go through her methodology that she talks about, and frankly, they tear it to shreds. The researchers looking at it, her sample sizes are off. The fact that she had no way to control how much or how little of the GM protein was being given to each of the rats, meaning the GM protein was put in the cages with the rats. No idea which individuals were, if one individual was eating all of it, some were eating a little of it. No controls were done for that aspect of the study. Her results were based on, what did they called it? Anecdotal references, meaning that, the researchers, the techs working with their animals noted, I noticed some behavioral changes in these rats. No double blind, no way of distinguishing between them. In one instance, she provided a photograph of 2 rats, one small, one big, next to each other, with the caption that the small rat was the one fed GM soy and the large rat was fed normal soy. Look at the difference in growth. When it was exposed by animal development, by people who study rats, that the rats were significantly different ages. Okay, these weren't from the same litter. These weren't from the same, they weren't born at the same time. Things like that. Another one in the Marshall paper, which if somebody really wants it, send me a PM and I look into getting you a copy of it. But in the Marshall paper, they talk about, Ermakov claims to have gotten her GM soy from a source, and they ask specifically where she got it from because she doesn't list any of there's no PCR, there's no assays done to determine the actual GM content of the soy she's giving. There's we just have to take her word on it that this was GM soy. She names the lab, names the provider of it. They don't produce the strain of GM soy. They don't provide that that she claims it comes from. So right there is a flaw that everybody, a whole bunch of different researchers all jumped on. They're like, that lab doesn't produce that strain at all. And then she couldn't quite remember where. Well, maybe it was somewhere else. I don't really. That's the kind of detail that a peer-reviewed scientific study needs to have. Oh yeah, and an additional critique of the Ermakov study is the fact that her control group, the infant mortality rate in her control group, was 10 times higher than any other reported study, meaning the normal mortality of rats, of this type of rat used in laboratory experiments, 10 times higher. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? Even her controls were dying at a higher rate than that. It's just, the whole study is flawed, and in there's been a number of other studies, again, links down below, that have attempted to reproduce this, and none of them have come up with anything close to her results at all, nothing. So, again, be suspicious of scientific studies that are reported only in the popular press. Now on to the Surov study. Now this is kind of interesting to me too, because Surov, another Russian researcher, again, his data is published only in newspaper articles or in conferences before anti-GMO groups. But this is interesting because he used hamsters this time. First of all, apparently I don't recall the breed, but the breed of hamster are they have a bunch of weird dietary requirements in the first place compared to other hamsters, which is why they're never used in feeding studies. But that's an aside. His group consisted of, his control group, his experimental groups consisted of 5 hamsters. 5. Okay? And this is the study that Smith loves to spread around about complete sterility within 3 generations. Okay? First of all, we can't even test that because, again, the study's not published. There's no details about how the study was done, the actual results of the study, or anything like that. We have Surov's word on that. We don't have any actual published results outside of what he claims. Again, that's not how science works. I would go so far as to say that 90% of everything that Smith claims about the dangers of GMO, of transgenic foods, come from those 2 studies. Now again, ask yourself the question, if there were actual good studies done, why doesn't he cite those? Why does he cite these 2 unpublished, unpeer-reviewed studies?
So what happens when when a GMO product, a GMO food, is digested by the human body? How does the body recognize the DNA makeup of that food?
It's a great question, and it's a question we've been asking for the answer for a long time. There's only been one human feeding study ever published.
Jeff, you know that whether or not a study's been published, it's never stopped you from using it before.
And the results were astonishing and dangerous. They found that the genes inserted into soybeans transferred into the DNA of the bacteria living inside our intestines and continued to function. This means long after we stop eating genetically modified foods, we may still have these dangerous genetically modified proteins produced continuously inside of us. Now, the soybean is designed not to die when sprayed with Roundup herbicide. It's called Roundup Ready Soy. The folks in this experiment had Roundup Ready gut bacteria, unkillable with Roundup. Now, the corn chips that we buy and eat, I don't, but others do, that are made from genetically modified corn, they're produced from a gene that produces an insecticide. Now, imagine if the gene that produces the insecticide were also to transfer to our gut bacteria. It might turn our intestinal flora into living pesticide factories, possibly for the long term. This is just one of the potential dangers that we would like to have had tested before this dangerous stuff got put on the market.
Okay, Jeff, you're referring to the Netherwood et al. Paper published in Nature Biotechnology in 2004. I happen to have a copy of that, so I'm going to take a closer look at it, and I want to see. I'm fascinated because if these authors concluded that a functioning transgene, a functioning copy of this Roundup Ready gene could be transferred to our gut bacteria, that's pretty incredible, and the implications are just amazing. And I'm of course, from my heart, I know that it must be in that paper. It's got to be in that paper. Otherwise, you wouldn't have said it, right? Because your level of honesty is been so high so far. Let's take a look. All right, here's a screen cap from the paper, Assessing the Survival of Transgenic Plant DNA in the Human Gastrointestinal Tract by Trudy Netherwood et al. So I'm just kind of looking at the abstract here, and I don't see anything resembling what Smith claimed this paper says in the abstract whatsoever. In fact, it specifically states that no intact fragments of the transgene were found. But anyway, I could be misunderstanding. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and let's look a little bit deeper into the paper. All right, let's look at page 4 of the article. Let's see here. What does it say? Oh, T0 digesta expanded by culturing. Small component. It should be noted that these bacteria contained only a fragment of EPSPS. That's the Roundup Ready proof gene that they're talking about. The full-length gene was not detected in these microbes. That's exactly the opposite of what Jeff Smith said this paper concluded. That's pretty interesting. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to the conclusion. Certainly the conclusion of this paper must mention this amazing discovery that Roundup Ready bacteria were discovered in this study. Let's take a look. In conclusion, we have shown that a small proportion of the transgenes in GM soya, like the native soya DNA, survive passage through the human upper gastrointestinal tract, but is completely degraded in the large intestine. That's not what Smith said. That's kind of interesting. Although we have found some evidence of pre-existing gene transfer between the GM soya and the human small intestinal microflora, the bacteria containing the transgenes represented a very small proportion of the microbial population, and there was no indication that the complete transgene had been transferred to the prokaryotes. Could Smith possibly have lied about the results of this paper? That's interesting. They go on. Thus, it is highly unlikely that the gene transfer events seen in this study would alter gastrointestinal function or pose a risk to human health. I thought this was a frightening... See, I was under the impression there, Jeffrey, that this study proved that Roundup Ready bacteria were already being produced in the human digestive tract, and that this study had proved it. In fact, looking through this entire study, looking through the methods section that follows the conclusion here, and this follows Nature's format, there's not a single mention of them culturing these bacteria in a Roundup media whatsoever. You made that shit up. Jeff, you're a fucking liar, okay? You're a fucking liar, and I don't know how you can live with yourself.
So the DNA in these genetically modified organisms, these genetically modified foods, the DNA can actually transfer to the human body. It can actually splice itself into the human body?
Well, in this case, they looked at the gut bacteria living inside of us, and there's about up to 10 pounds of gut bacteria living inside our intestines. It is possible that it could splice into our own DNA. It's been found in the tissues of animals. It's been found in the blood. We don't know yet whether it actually integrates and starts to function in our DNA, but it does integrate and function into the bacteria living inside our digestive tract.
This is absolutely terrifying stuff.
I agree. This would be terrifying stuff, if it were true. But luckily for us, thank the good Lord that, Jeff Smith's imagination can't actually harm us.
I want people to take action on this issue because, this is a serious risk to the environment, to our health. How can people find you, follow you, keep track of what your actions are, and just generally take action on these issues? How can they do it?
Well, our website, responsibletechnology.org, has a campaign for healthier eating in America designed to create a tipping point of consumer rejection against GMOs. When Europe achieved its tipping point back 11 years ago, within a single week, virtually every major food company committed to stop using GM ingredients because the GM ingredients had become a marketing liability. When a coalition of us in the United States were educating consumers about the potential cancer risk of milk from cows injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, that's also been seeing a tipping point. It's been kicked out of Walmart and Starbucks and Yoplait and Dannon, most of America's dairy.
Just a couple of points I want to make here. Jeff seems to be under the idea that somehow if a scare results in an action, therefore the motivation behind the scare was legitimate. I hope that made some sense. If people large scale stop using a product because they're afraid it's going to kill them, therefore the product really was going to kill them, not that the fear was unfounded. This is the same. I mean, by this logic, that would mean that, frankly, my child's public school should be teaching young earth creationism because, you know what, a majority of people want that in our schools, right? Therefore, it must be true, right? You see what I'm saying? Earlier, the host referred to the aspartame, you know, what a big scare that was, you know, how frightening that was. The FDA approved that. Again, the whole aspartame causing cancer thing was based on an internet hoax. It was a hoax, a chain letter sent around that gathered enough weight that a lot of products quit using it. A lot of stores, a lot of things quit carrying the sweetener, the artificial sweetener, aspartame, in their thing. I still see products on the shelf that have boldly displayed across their front aspartame free or whatever the brand name of it is, okay? The point being, even though there's no legitimate health concern there, public pressure resulted in it being removed. And what Jeff is suggesting here is that if we can get enough people scared about GMOs, we can remove them from the grocery store shelves. We can remove them from our food ingredients, therefore proving that they were dangerous to start with. Seems to be his implication. Now, this logic just really it irks me. Okay, it is, again, it's a fear motivated thing. It's not based on studies. It's not based on science. Okay, again, and I hate to keep saying this over and over and over again, but I believe that if an actual peer-reviewed scientific study showed even the most insignificant health risk of this genetically modified, this transgenic foods, he would be holding that up and repeating it over and over and over again. The fact that he relies on these unpublished studies or email clippings and things that people have sent him or newspaper articles and that kind of stuff rather than peer-reviewed literature convinces me he's got nothing.
So now we're engineering a tipping point against genetically engineered foods, and all we need, we think, is about 5% of U.S. shoppers avoiding GMOs. Because these products give no consumer benefit, if millions of dollars are lost to companies using GM ingredients, they've already taken the GM ingredients out of their European and Japanese brands, they'll see the trend and remove GMOs here as well. So it's a way that we can empower ourselves. We don't have to whine to the government and to ask them to fix it for us. We don't have to try and convince the FDA, which is actually the food safety czar at the FDA, is Monsanto's former attorney, later their vice president. He was the one that fast-tracked GMOs in 1992 by instituting a policy that ignored the actual warnings by the FDA scientists. So we don't have to put ourselves in a position of weakness. We who are at the top of the food chain, the citizens of the United States, can determine what we want to eat and what we put in our mouths, and that will determine what the food companies will use in the products that they sell us.
Okay, I'm going to admit that the fact that Michael Taylor was a lawyer who worked for Monsanto and actually represented some of their departments and then went on to work for the FDA, although he actually started at the FDA. He also worked for the Department of Agriculture as well before returning to Monsanto and such. That there's a potential for a conflict of interest. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to argue against that. But it seems to me that every book that I've seen now, every article I've seen by Smith and Robbins and all these others about, you know, the evil Monsanto Corporation, that's like sort of their number one point. They use that point then to hang the fact that, you know, the FDA and the Monsanto are working together, conspiring against all of us poor Americans to poison us all and all this kind of shit. That's what they depend on, you know, that this connection. And in doing so, they exaggerate, like you heard Jeff Smith say right there. He said that that Taylor was the vice president of Monsanto, when in reality he was vice president of their public policy department, the department in Monsanto, the specific part of Monsanto that ensures Monsanto is internally compliant with federal law. So he is the vice president of a department. That doesn't make him vice president of Monsanto. That sounds like he's got this, you know, super powerful position within, and I'm not saying his position is not powerful. And again, I'm not disagreeing that there's certainly room for a conflict of interest in this. But you know what? If we're going to judge people, by what they've done, things they've done in the past, and this kind of stuff, let's take a look at Jeff. I know. What in the fuck are we looking at here? Well, that is Jeffrey Smith at a press conference for the Natural Law Party in Iowa demonstrating yogic flying, a technique of meditation and bouncing on your ass until, when you get good enough according to the Maharishi, you can actually fly around the room using only your mind. I'm not making this shit up. Smith is a longtime practitioner of transcendental meditation and a graduate of the Maharishi University of Management in Fairfield, Iowa. Also associated with this university is the Maharishi Vedic Organic Agriculture Institute and the Maharishi Vedic City Organic Farm. What does this mean? Well, Jeffrey Smith, it would appear, is listed as Vice President of Media and Communications for a company administered by the Maharishi Vedic Organic Agriculture Institute called Genetic ID, which tests foods for GMO contamination. Genetic ID is owned by Dr. John Fagan, who is also the Dean of Maharishi U. I'm not saying there's any foul play afoot, but I find it interesting that Smith works for a company that directly profits from every GM product removed from our food supply and is also strongly connected with a major supplier of non-GMO crops. By the way, Smith also ran for U.S. Congress for another Maharishi-run political party called the Natural Law Party that believes that with a core of yogic flyers, a wave of peace could be spread worldwide that would end the need for national defense.
All right, Jeffrey Smith, what's the website again?
responsibletechnology.org, and to help you eat non-GMO foods, nongmoshoppingguide.com.
All right, Jeffrey Smith, thank you for joining us on this very important interview. We hope to have you back soon with an update on these actions and how people can take further control of their diet to keep these GMO foods out.